What happens when one of Hollywood's most unpredictable actors sits down with one of daytime television's most outspoken hosts? You're about to find out, and trust me, this is one interview that went completely off the rails. Before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this story is absolutely wild. Billy Bob Thornton walked onto the view set with his usual quiet intensity, wearing dark sunglasses despite the studio lights. The audience applauded politely as he settled into the guest chair, adjusting his collar and crossing his legs. Whoopi Goldberg started with the standard welcome, asking about his latest film project, and Billy Bob gave short, measured responses. Everything seemed normal enough for the first few minutes. Then Joy Behar leaned forward with that familiar grin of hers. "So, Billy Bob, I have to ask," Joy said. "You've been married 6 times. 6 times. What do you think it is about marriage that keeps drawing you back in?" The studio went quiet. Billy Bob removed his sunglasses slowly and placed them on the table in front of him. His expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he didn't appreciate the question. "Well, Joy," he began, his Arkansas drawl more pronounced than usual, "I suppose I could ask you why you feel the need to bring up someone's personal life in the first 30 seconds of a conversation, but I'm too polite for that." A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience. Joy's smile tightened slightly, but she pressed on. "It's not personal, it's public record. You're a public figure. Your relationships have been very, very public." "Public record," Billy Bob repeated, nodding slowly. "So if something's public record, that makes it fair game. That's interesting. Real interesting." Sonny Hostin jumped in, trying to smooth things over. "I think what Joy means is that you've been very open about your relationships in the past. You've talked about them in interviews." "I've talked about my work in interviews," Billy Bob corrected, his voice level but firm. "I've talked about my music, my films, my craft. But somewhere along the way, people decided that being an actor means you forfeit your right to privacy, that everything about your life becomes entertainment for folks sitting at home." Joy wasn't backing down. "But you chose this profession. You chose to be in the spotlight." "I chose to be an actor," Billy Bob shot back. "I didn't choose to have my personal relationships dissected on morning television by people who don't know me, don't know what I've been through, and frankly, have no business asking about it." The tension in the studio was palpable now. Whoopi tried to redirect the conversation to his new film, but Joy wasn't finished. "I think you're being a little sensitive," Joy said, leaning back in her chair with her arms crossed. "We ask every guest about their personal lives. It's part of the show." "Sensitive," Billy Bob said, and there was an edge to his voice now. "You know what's sensitive, Joy? Calling someone sensitive when they set a boundary, that's a manipulation tactic. I know it, you know it, and everyone watching knows it." Sarah N. looked uncomfortable, glancing between her co-hosts. Alyssa Farrah-Griffin started to say something, but Billy Bob continued. "I came here to talk about my film. I came here to talk about the work. But instead, we're playing this game where you try to get me to say something quotable, something that'll end up in a headline. Well, I'm not playing." Joy laughed, but it sounded forced. "Nobody's playing games, Billy Bob. We're just having a conversation." "No," he said firmly. "You're having a conversation. I'm being interrogated about my personal life, like I'm on trial. There's a difference." "Oh, come on," Joy said, waving her hand dismissively. "You're being dramatic. This is what talk shows do." "We talk dramatic," Billy Bob repeated. He stood up suddenly, and the audience gasped. "I'll tell you what's dramatic, Joy. What's dramatic is sitting here trying to have a respectful conversation while you keep poking and prodding, trying to get a reaction. Well, congratulations. You got one." "Sit down," Joy said, her voice harder now. "You're being ridiculous. I'm being ridiculous." Billy Bob's voice rose for the first time. "I'm being ridiculous for wanting to be treated with basic respect. For wanting to talk about my work instead of my personal life. That's ridiculous to you." Whoopi stood up, trying to take control of the situation. "Let's all just take a breath here. Billy Bob, please, sit down. Joy, maybe we can move on to different questions." But neither of them was listening to Whoopi now. They were locked in, staring at each other across the table. "You know what your problem is?" Joy said, pointing at him. "Your problem is, you can't handle a strong woman asking you tough questions. That's what this is really about." Billy Bob's jaw tightened. "Don't you dare turn this into that. Don't you dare make this about gender, when it's about respect. I've worked with some of the strongest women in this industry, women I admire deeply. This has nothing to do with you being a woman, and everything to do with you being rude." The audience was completely silent now. You could hear the cameras adjusting, the crew members shifting nervously. Rude. Joy stood up now too, matching his energy. "I'm rude. I'm doing my job. You're the one who came on this show with an attitude." "I came on this show to promote my film," Billy Bob said, his voice dangerously quiet now. "I came here as a guest, and guests, Joy, are supposed to be treated with hospitality." "But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "Okay, that's enough," Whoopi said loudly, stepping between them. "We're going to take a commercial break." But the damage was done. Billy Bob grabbed his sunglasses from the table and headed toward the exit. A producer rushed over, trying to stop him, but he brushed past. Joy called after him, "Walk off then. Run away. That's mature." Billy Bob stopped at the edge of the set and turned back. "You want mature, Joy? Mature is knowing when to stop pushing someone. Mature is respecting boundaries. Mature is not treating your guests like they're here for your personal amusement. But I guess at your age, if you haven't learned that yet, you're not going to." The audience gasped audibly at that comment. Joy's face went red. "Get him out of here," she said to the producers. "Get him off my stage, your stage." Billy Bob laughed. "A bitter sound. This isn't your stage, Joy. This is a television studio where you happen to work. And I'm leaving anyway because I have better things to do than be disrespected by someone who thinks being on TV gives them the right to say whatever they want to, whoever they want." Alyssa tried one more time to salvage the situation. "Billy Bob, please, let's just talk this through." But he was already walking off the set, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. Joy stood there, arms crossed, face flushed, clearly furious. Whoopi put her head in her hands. The cameras kept rolling for another few seconds before someone finally yelled to cut. When they came back from commercial, Billy Bob's chair was empty. Whoopi addressed the audience with a forced smile, saying they were sorry for what everyone had just witnessed. Joy sat there with a defiant expression, not apologizing, not backing down. She looked directly into the camera and said that sometimes guests come on the show unprepared for real questions. And that's not the view's fault. The audience didn't know how to react. Some people clapped hesitantly. Others just sat there shocked by what they'd witnessed. It was clear that something had just happened that would be talked about for a very long time. The commercial break felt like it lasted forever, but it was only 3 minutes. During that time, producers were frantically talking into their headsets, trying to figure out what to do. Whoopi was having an intense whispered conversation with one of them. Sarah and Sunny sat quietly, clearly uncomfortable. Alyssa kept glancing toward the exit where Billy Bob had disappeared. Joy, meanwhile, sat at the table with her arms still crossed, shaking her head and muttering to herself. Finally, she looked at Whoopi and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'm not apologizing." "I didn't do anything wrong. Nobody's asking you to apologize," Whoopi replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "We just need to get through the rest of the show." "He's the one who walked off," Joy continued, her voice rising. "He's the one who couldn't handle a simple question. Why is everyone acting like I'm the problem here?" Before anyone could respond, there was a commotion near the backstage entrance. Billy Bob had reappeared, walking back onto the set with a producer trailing behind him, looking confused and relieved at the same time. The audience stirred, unsure whether to applaud or stay silent. Most chose silence. Billy Bob didn't sit down. He stood at the edge of the stage, looking directly at Joy. "I came back," he said, his voice calm but firm, "because I don't want anyone thinking I ran away from this conversation. I want to finish what we started." Joy's eyebrows shot up. "Oh, so now you want to talk? Now that you've made your dramatic exit and got everyone's attention." "I got everyone's attention," Billy Bob said incredulously. "You've been trying to get a rise out of me since I sat down. You succeeded. Congratulations. But let's be clear about something, Joy. I didn't come back here for you. I came back here for everyone watching who might think that what just happened was okay." "It's not okay." Whoopi stood up. "Billy Bob, why? Don't you sit down and we can have a civil conversation about this." He ignored her, keeping his focus on Joy. "You want to know why I got upset? You want to know why I walked off? It's because people like you, Joy, you hide behind your platform. You hide behind this show, behind your co-hosts, behind the audience. And you say things you'd never say if it was just you and me having a conversation in private. That's not true, Joy shot back. I would absolutely ask you the same questions in private. I'm not hiding behind anything. Really? Billy Bob challenged. So if we were at a dinner party and you just met me, you'd open with asking about my 6 marriages. That's how you'd start a conversation with someone you just met. Joy hesitated for just a moment, and Billy Bob caught it. That's what I thought, he said. See, that hesitation right there, that tells me everything I need to know. You know it was inappropriate. You know it was rude. But you did it anyway because that's what this show does. It tears people down for entertainment. We don't tear people down, Sonny interjected, finally speaking up. We ask hard questions. There's a difference. Billy Bob turned to her. Hard questions about what, Sonny? Hard questions about my work, about the film industry, about the craft of acting. No. Hard questions about my personal relationships, which have nothing to do with why I'm here. That's not journalism. That's gossip. It's not gossip when you've put it out there yourself, Joy argued. You've talked about your marriages in interviews before. You wrote about them in your book. I wrote about my experiences, my growth, my mistakes, Billy Bob corrected. I wrote about them in the context of my journey as a person and an artist. I didn't write them so talk show hosts could weaponize them against me years later. The audience was completely engaged now, watching this back and forth like a tennis match. Some people were nodding along with Billy Bob. Others seemed to be on Joy's side. Weaponize. Joy laughed, but it sounded hollow. Oh, please. You're being so overdramatic. I asked you one question that led to another, Billy Bob said, and when I tried to redirect the conversation, you called me sensitive. When I set a boundary, you called me dramatic. When I tried to leave, you mocked me. At what point, Joy, do you take responsibility for the atmosphere you create? Joy stood up now, matching his stance. I take responsibility for doing my job. I take responsibility for asking questions that our audience wants answers to. I don't take responsibility for your inability to handle a normal interview. Normal interview, Billy Bob repeated, shaking his head. You keep using that phrase, normal interview. As if there's anything normal about ambushing someone with personal questions, and then gaslighting them when they object. Gaslighting? Joy's voice rose sharply. Now, I'm gaslighting you. Do you even know what that word means? I know exactly what it means, Billy Bob said, stepping closer to the table. It means making someone question their own reality. It means telling someone they're overreacting when they have a legitimate grievance. It means twisting the situation to make the victim look like the aggressor. Sound familiar? Whoopi put her hand on Joy's shoulder, trying to calm her down, but Joy shrugged it off. I'm not gaslighting anyone, Joy said, her voice shaking slightly with anger or adrenaline or both. You're spinning this to make yourself look like some kind of victim. Poor Billy Bob asked about his public relationships on a talk show. How dare I? You're still doing it, Billy Bob said, his voice getting quieter, which somehow made it more intense. You're still trying to minimize what happened here. You're still trying to make it seem like I'm the problem. Sarah finally spoke up, her voice gentle. Maybe we can all agree that this got heated, and both sides could have handled it differently. No, Billy Bob said firmly, turning to her. No, Sarah, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this isn't a both-sides situation. I came here as a guest. I was respectful. I answered questions about my work. And then Joy decided to make it personal. That's not on me. Everything with you is personal, Joy snapped. That's the problem. You can't separate yourself from your ego long enough to have a real conversation. Billy Bob laughed, a genuine laugh this time, but there was no humor in it. My ego? That's rich coming from someone who interrupts their guests, talks over them, and then gets offended when they push back. You want to talk about ego, Joy? Let's talk about the ego it takes to think you're entitled to someone's personal trauma just because they're famous. Trauma. Joy's voice dripped with skepticism. Oh, now your marriages are trauma. You're really milking this for all it's worth, aren't you? And there it is, Billy Bob said, pointing at her. Right there, that dismissiveness, that mockery. You just proved my point better than I ever could. You don't care about me as a person. You don't care about what I've been through. You care about the spectacle. You care about the moment. You care about having something to talk about after I leave. Alyssa tried to jump in. I think what's important here is that we're all passionate people who care about having meaningful conversations. Meaningful conversations, Billy Bob said, turning to her. Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm standing, this is a circus, and I'm the clown you brought in to perform. Joy threw her hands up. If you feel like a clown, that's on you. Nobody made you come here. Nobody forced you to sit in that chair. You wanted the publicity for your film, didn't you? Well, this is what comes with it. No, Billy Bob said sharply. No, Joy. Publicity is talking about my work. Publicity is discussing the film, the story, the characters, the process. What you're doing is exploitation. You're exploiting my past, my pain, my personal life for ratings. And you're doing it with a smile on your face like it's all just fun and games. If you can't handle the heat, get out of the kitchen, Joy shot back. This is show business. This is how it works. No, Billy Bob said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. This is how you work. This is how you've chosen to do your job. But it doesn't have to be this way. There are plenty of talk show hosts who treat their guests with dignity. There are plenty of interviewers who know how to ask tough questions without being cruel. You're just not one of them. The silence that followed was deafening. Joy's face had gone from red to almost purple. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. Finally, she turned to the producers off camera. Are we really going to let him stand here and insult me on my own show? She demanded. It's not your show, Billy Bob said quietly. It's The View. There are 5 of you. Or have you forgotten that? That was apparently the final straw. Joy turned back to Billy Bob with a look that could cut glass. You need to leave. Right now? You've insulted me. You've insulted this show. And you've made a complete fool of yourself on national television. I'm not leaving until I've said what I came back to say, Billy Bob replied, his voice steady. And what I need to say is this. For everyone watching right now, for everyone who's ever been made to feel like they're being difficult for setting boundaries, for everyone who's been called sensitive or dramatic for standing up for themselves, I want you to know something. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. And you don't owe anyone access to your personal pain just because they think they're entitled to it. Oh my God, Joy said, rolling her eyes. You're actually giving a speech now. This is unbelievable. Let him finish, Whoopi said quietly, and there was something in her voice that made everyone pause. She was looking at Billy Bob with an expression that was hard to read, somewhere between respect and concern. Billy Bob continued, I've been in this industry for decades. I've done hundreds of interviews, and I can tell you that most interviewers, most hosts, they understand that there's a line. They understand that being curious doesn't mean being invasive. They understand that wanting to connect with someone's story doesn't mean you're entitled to dissect their entire life. We dissect everyone's life, Joy interrupted. That's literally what we do on this show. We talk about current events, we talk about celebrities, we talk about politicians. Why should you be any different? Because I'm sitting right here in front of you, Billy Bob said, his voice rising again. That's the difference. Joy. When you talk about someone who's not in the room, that's commentary. That's analysis. That's your job. But when that person is sitting 3 feet away from you, looking you in the eye, and asking you to respect their boundaries, that's when you need to be a human being first and a talk show host second. Sunny leaned forward, her lawyer instincts kicking in. But Billy Bob, you have to admit that public figures have a different standard when it comes to privacy. The courts have established that. The courts have established what's legal, Billy Bob agreed, turning to her. They haven't established what's decent. They haven't established what's kind. They haven't established what's right. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And just because something is legal doesn't make it ethical. So now we're unethical, Joy said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. We're unethical for asking questions, for doing our jobs, for giving our audience what they want. Your audience wants a spectacle, Billy Bob said. Your audience wants drama. Your audience wants to see someone squirm, and you're more than happy to provide it. But at what cost? Joy. At what cost to the people you bring on this stage? At what cost to your own integrity? My integrity? Joy's voice cracked slightly. Don't you dare question my integrity. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've interviewed presidents, celebrities, activists, artists. I've covered every major story. I've earned my place at this table. I'm not questioning your experience, Billy Bob said, his tone softening just slightly. "I'm questioning your approach. I'm questioning whether the person you've become on this show is the person you want to be. Because I'll tell you something, Joy, and I mean this sincerely, I don't think you're a bad person. I think you're a person who's been doing this job so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to be on the other side of those questions." For the first time since the argument started, Joy seemed to hesitate. Her expression flickered, just for a moment, and something like uncertainty crossed her face. But then it hardened again. "I don't need a lecture from you about empathy," she said. "I don't need you to psychoanalyze me or tell me how to do my job. What I need is for you to either sit down and finish this interview properly or leave. Those are your options." Billy Bob looked at her for a long moment, then looked at each of the other hosts in turn. Sarah looked sympathetic. Sunny looked conflicted. Alyssa looked uncomfortable. Whoopi looked tired. "You know what the saddest part of all this is?" Billy Bob said finally. "The saddest part is that I actually like The View. I've watched this show. I've seen you all have incredible conversations about important topics. I've seen you challenge guests in ways that made them think, that made the audience think. I've seen this show at its best. But somewhere along the way, challenging someone became the same thing as attacking them. Somewhere along the way, tough questions became invasive questions. And nobody seems to want to admit that there's a difference." "We know there's a difference," Alyssa said quietly. "We do try to walk that line." "Then where was that line today?" Billy Bob asked her directly. "At what point was someone going to step in and say, 'Hey, maybe we should move on to a different topic'? At what point was someone going to protect me the way you'd want to be protected if you were in my position?" None of them had an immediate answer. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and heavy. Joy finally broke it. "You want protection? You want to be coddled? Then maybe you shouldn't be in this business. Maybe you should go back to Arkansas and live a quiet life if you can't handle the attention that comes with fame." "There it is again," Billy Bob said, shaking his head. "That assumption that wanting respect is the same as wanting to be coddled. That having boundaries is the same as being weak. That's your worldview, Joy. That's how you see things. But it's not reality. Strong people have boundaries. Confident people have boundaries. Healthy people have boundaries. The only people who have a problem with boundaries are the people who benefit from violating them." Joy stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm done with this. I'm done being lectured by someone who walked off my stage, came back for attention, and is now acting like he's some kind of victim. Producers, please escort him out. This interview is over." "The interview was over the moment you made it personal," Billy Bob said. "Everything that's happened since then has just been you proving my point." Two security personnel appeared at the edge of the stage, looking uncertain. Billy Bob saw them and nodded. "It's okay," he said to them. "I'm leaving, but I'm leaving on my own terms, not because Joy told me to go. I'm leaving because there's no point in continuing a conversation with someone who's more interested in being right than being decent." He started walking toward the exit, then stopped and turned back one more time. "One last thing," he said, looking directly at Joy. "When you watch this back later, and you will watch it back because everyone's going to be talking about it, I want you to pay attention to something. Pay attention to your face. Pay attention to your body language. Pay attention to the moments where you could have de-escalated but chose to push harder instead. And ask yourself why. Ask yourself what you were really trying to accomplish here. Because I don't think it was a good interview. I think it was something else entirely." Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Billy Bob held up his hand. "I'm done," he said simply. "I've said everything I needed to say. You can have the last word if you want it. I know how important that is to you." And with that, he walked off the stage for the second and final time. The security personnel followed at a respectful distance, more like escorts than enforcers. The audience sat in stunned silence, not sure whether to applaud or gasp or do anything at all. Joy stood there, shaking slightly, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Whoopi put a hand on her arm, but Joy pulled away and sat down heavily in her chair. "Well," Joy said after a moment, her voice not quite steady, "I guess some people just can't handle real talk." But nobody laughed. Nobody agreed. The other hosts exchanged glances, and the audience remained quiet. Even Joy seemed to realize that her comment hadn't landed the way she'd intended. Whoopi cleared her throat and looked directly into the camera. we're going to take another break. When we come back, we'll continue with today's topics. As the cameras cut away and the red lights dimmed, Joy sat there staring at the empty chair where Billy Bob had been sitting. Her co-hosts didn't say anything. They didn't need to. The weight of what had just happened hung in the air like smoke, and everyone on that stage knew that this was a moment that would define the view for a long time to come. The question wasn't whether Billy Bob was right or wrong. The question wasn't whether Joy had crossed a line or simply done her job. The question that everyone was left wondering, sitting in that studio and watching at home, was simpler and more complicated than that. The question was whether anyone had really won this confrontation or if everyone had lost something in the process. And that's the story of how Billy Bob Thornton got kicked off The View after a heated clash with Joy Behar. If you made it this far, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. What do you think? Was Billy Bob right to push back the way he did? Or was Joy just doing her job? Let me know in the comments.